The stagecoach rattled into Lewiston, Idaho on a blistering July afternoon in 1878, carrying Eleanor Rose and the weight of 7 years of whispered failures. And she knew before her boots even touched the dusty street that this town would be no different from all the others, where women measured her worth by what her womb had never produced. She stepped down from the coach, her traveling dress already clinging to her skin from the relentless heat that shimmered off the wooden storefronts lining Main Street. At 32, Eleanor carried herself with a dignity that came from surviving judgments that would have crushed softer women. Her marriage to Thomas had ended not in death, but in dissolution, a rare thing that had branded her with an additional scarlet letter in the eyes of proper society. He had wanted sons to work his farm in Ohio. She had wanted a partnership built on something more than her ability to breed like livestock. When 5 years produced no children, he had made it clear that she was disposable, replaceable, worth less than the plow horse that at least earned its keep. So she had left, took her maiden name back, learned bookkeeping and correspondence, moved from town to town, working where she could, saving what little remained after boarding house fees and basic necessities. Lewiston represented her latest fresh start, a growing town on the edge of Idaho territory where the Snake and Clearwater rivers met, where timber and mining brought enough commerce that perhaps someone might need a woman who could manage accounts and write a decent letter. The streets bustled with afternoon activity. Miners fresh from the mountains, their pockets heavy with modest earnings, loggers whose calloused hands could fell a tree in minutes, cowboys driving cattle through to market. And women, always women, watching from doorways and corners, their eyes assessing Eleanor with that particular sharpness that came from defending territory they believed she might threaten. Eleanor collected her trunk from the coach driver and asked directions to the boarding house that had been recommended in the advertisement she had answered. Mrs. Harriet Walsh ran a respectable establishment for single women and widows, or so the posting had claimed. As Eleanor made her way down the wooden sidewalk, she heard the whispers starting already. A woman traveling alone, no wedding ring, not young enough to be a fresh bride seeking a husband, not old enough to be safely past the age of temptation. Dangerous. Suspect. Other. The boarding house stood on a quiet street 1 block back from the main commercial district, a tidy 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. Eleanor knocked, and the door opened to reveal a round-faced woman in her 50s with shrewd but not unkind eyes. Mrs. Walsh. "I'm Eleanor Rose. I wrote about the room." Of course. Come in out of this heat, child." Harriet Walsh stepped aside, ushering Eleanor into a dim, blessedly cool hallway. "You look about done in. Long journey from Boise. Before that, further east than I care to remember." Something in Eleanor's tone made Harriet pause in her efficient bustle toward the stairs. She turned, studying her new boarder with more attention. Running from something or towards something, Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Neither, just moving forward," Harriet nodded slowly. "That's answer enough. Rooms upstairs, second door on the left. Meals are breakfast at 7, supper at 6. No men above the first floor, no liquor, no loud disturbances. Church on Sunday is encouraged but not required, and I don't pry into what brought you here as long as you pay on time and don't bring trouble to my door. That seems more than fair." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over a small garden. Eleanor set down her trunk and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the exhaustion of travel and of years of traveling settle into her bones. She allowed herself 5 minutes of stillness, of letting her shoulders drop, and her face relax from the careful expression of pleasant neutrality she wore like armor. Then she stood, unpacked her one good dress, and prepared to begin the work of establishing herself in yet another town that would likely judge her before knowing her. The next morning, Eleanor walked into the office of the Lewiston Daily Chronicle and asked to speak with the editor about the posting for a bookkeeper and assistant. The editor, a harried man named Mr. Jennings with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually distracted air, looked her up and down with surprise. "You're here about the bookkeeping position." "I am. I have 5 years of experience managing accounts for a dry goods business in Boise, and before that I kept the books for my husband's farm in Ohio. I can provide references." Mr. Jennings blinked. "Well, I'll be frank, Mrs. Rose, though I no longer use my married name." His eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Rose, I was expecting men to apply. Bookkeeping requires a steady hand with figures and the ability to track complex accounts." Eleanor smiled the smile that did not reach her eyes, the one she had perfected through repetition. "Then it's fortunate that arithmetic doesn't require anything more than a brain, which I possess regardless of my sex. Would you like to test my abilities, or shall I seek employment elsewhere?" Something in her directness seemed to amuse him. He shuffled through papers on his desk and produced a ledger. "Tell me what you see wrong in these accounts from last month." Eleanor took the ledger, sat without being invited to, and studied the columns. It took less than 3 minutes to spot the discrepancy. "Your supplier invoices don't match your payment records. You've been overcharged by $6.30 on newsprint and undercharged by $2 on ink. The ink underpayment might be deliberate generosity on the supplier's part, but the newsprint is likely an accounting error they'll expect you to catch. Also, your advertisement revenues are listed inconsistently, sometimes recorded when promised and sometimes when paid, which makes accurate monthly accounting impossible." Mr. Jennings stared at her. Then he laughed, a surprised bark of sound. "When can you start?" "Tomorrow morning, if you'll have me. 8 o'clock. Pay is $15 a month to start." It was less than he would have paid a man, and they both knew it. But it was enough to cover her boarding fees with a little left over, and Eleanor had learned to choose her battles. 16, and I'll also manage your correspondence and subscription records. 15 and 50 cents. Done. She left the newspaper office with employment secured and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This part, at least, she had always been able to manage. It was the other parts of life in small western towns that inevitably wore her down. The first Sunday, Eleanor attended church at Harriet's gentle insistence that it would help her establish herself as respectable. The small white church stood on a rise overlooking the river, and the congregation that gathered represented the full spectrum of Lewiston society. Mining families in their carefully preserved good clothes. Merchants and their wives dressed in fashions only a season or two behind San Francisco styles. Working people who smelled of soap and earnest effort. And in the back pews, the cowboys and ranch hands who came to town on Sundays more out of habit than devotion. Eleanor took a seat near the middle, aware of eyes tracking her movement. The whispers had already started, she knew. The divorced woman, the childless one. There must have been something wrong with her. Barren, probably. What kind of woman could not give her husband children? What kind of woman left a marriage instead of accepting her lot with Christian forbearance? The sermon washed over her, the familiar words about duty and righteousness and submission. Afterward, as the congregation spilled out into the summer sunshine, Eleanor found herself surrounded by a cluster of women whose smiles did not quite reach their eyes. "Mrs. Rose, isn't it?" The speaker was a tall woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, with the kind of beauty that had once opened doors and now demanded they stay open through force of personality. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Whitmore. My husband owns the largest dry goods store in town. I understand you're working for Mr. Jennings at the newspaper." "I am. It's good to meet you. How unusual for a woman to work outside the home. I suppose you must need the income." The question carried layers of implication. No husband to provide, no family to support her. Alone by choice or by failure, Eleanor kept her smile steady. "I've always enjoyed working with figures and accounts. It keeps the mind sharp, of course." Catherine's gaze swept over Eleanor with the precision of a general assessing terrain. "And you came here from Boise, most recently, yes." "Traveling alone. How brave, or perhaps foolhardy." Catherine laughed, a tinkling sound that the other women echoed. "A woman alone is so vulnerable. One would think the natural solution would be to find a good husband to provide protection and purpose. I found I'm quite capable of protecting myself and creating my own purpose." "Ah, yes. I had heard you were divorced." The word dropped like a stone into the conversation, creating ripples of indrawn breath and exchanged glances. Such an unfortunate situation. Of course, one does wonder what circumstances could drive a man to such an extreme measure. Children often provide such a strong bond in a marriage. The lack of them must create such a void. There it was. The judgment delivered with a smile, the cruelty wrapped in false sympathy. Eleanor had heard variations of this speech in every town, from every woman who measured her own worth by her fertility and needed to diminish those who failed to meet that standard. Before Eleanor could respond, a voice cut through the tension, drawing every eye. "Mrs. Whitmore, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, and I find myself confused. I was under the impression that the sermon today was about loving our neighbors, not interrogating newcomers about their private lives." The man who spoke stood slightly apart from the main crowd, and Eleanor recognized him from church as one of the cowboys who had sat in the back pew. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but worn, the practical garments of a working man. But it was his eyes that struck her, dark and direct, holding a steadiness that suggested a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to apologize for it. Catherine's smile turned brittle. "Mr. Tucker, how kind of you to concern yourself with women's conversation. I'm sure you have business elsewhere." "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Rose about a business matter." He turned to Eleanor, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Not pity, not judgment. Just a straightforward recognition of one human being by another. "Madam, I'm Preston Tucker. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles east of town. I heard you're good with accounting, and I'm drowning in paperwork I don't understand. Government land claims, tax documents, bills of sale for livestock. I'm wondering if you might be willing to take on some additional work for pay." It was a lifeline thrown with perfect timing, and Eleanor grasped it. "Mr. Tucker, I'd be happy to discuss it. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting at the newspaper office where we could review the documentation." "That would be much appreciated. How about Tuesday afternoon? 2 o'clock would work well." Preston tipped his hat to the circle of women, his eyes lingering on Catherine with an expression that might have been amusement or might have been warning. "Ladies, enjoy the rest of your Sunday." He walked away, and the circle of women burst into excited whispers the moment he was out of earshot. "Well," Catherine said, her voice sharp with something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "Preston Tucker showing interest in a woman. That's a first since his wife died." One of the other women, younger and more eager to share gossip, leaned in. 7 years ago, wasn't it? Such a tragedy. She died giving birth to their 4th child. The baby died too. He's been raising those 3 children alone ever since. Won't hear of remarrying, though half the unmarried women in the county have tried. 4 children before she was 28, another woman added. That's what a woman is meant for. Of course, some women never manage even one. The barb was directed at Eleanor, but she barely heard it. Her mind was turning over this new information. Preston Tucker, widower, 3 children, a man who had known love and loss and had apparently chosen solitude over replacement. Catherine's smile had returned, though it carried a predatory edge. I should warn you, Mrs. Rose. Preston Tucker is not a man looking for a wife. He's made that abundantly clear to every woman who has tried to catch his interest. If you're hoping this business arrangement might lead to something more, you'll find yourself disappointed. Eleanor met Catherine's gaze levelly. Mrs. Whitmore, I came to Lewiston seeking employment, not a husband. I assure you my interest in Mr. Tucker is purely professional. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to the boarding house. She walked away with her head high, feeling their eyes on her back like brands. But she also felt something else, something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. A flicker of curiosity about the man who had stepped into that circle of judgment and offered her a way out without making a show of it. Tuesday afternoon arrived hot and still, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned every movement into an effort. Eleanor had spent the morning working through the newspaper's subscription records, organizing them into a system that actually made sense. When Preston Tucker walked into the newspaper office at precisely 2 o'clock, she had just finished washing the ink from her fingers. Mr. Tucker. Punctual. I appreciate that. He removed his hat, holding it in work-roughened hands. My mother would have switched me if I'd been late to meet a lady. She was fierce about manners. Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. She passed 5 years ago. Pneumonia. He sat, looking slightly uncomfortable in the small office space, as if he were more accustomed to open sky than 4 walls. I brought the papers I mentioned. I'm afraid they're a mess. He pulled a leather satchel from his shoulder and began removing documents, spreading them across Eleanor's desk. She could see immediately that he had not been exaggerating. Land claims, tax assessments, livestock bills of sale, supply invoices, loan documents from the bank, all jumbled together without organization or apparent system. Eleanor pulled the pile toward her and began sorting, her fingers moving automatically to create categories. How long has it been since anyone organized these? In all honesty, maybe never. My father started the ranch, and he wasn't much for paperwork. When he died, I took over, and I've just been shoving papers in that bag whenever someone hands me something official-looking. I know I'm probably getting cheated on half these deals, but I can't make sense of what I owe versus what I'm owed. You need a proper ledger system, and these land claims need to be filed with the territorial office, or you risk losing your grazing rights. Eleanor pulled out one document that made her frown. This tax assessment seems high. What's your total acreage? 800 acres deeded, another 2,000 in grazing rights on government land. Eleanor did quick calculations in her head. You're being taxed as if you own all 2,800 acres outright. That's incorrect and probably costing you hundreds of dollars. Has anyone from the assessor's office actually surveyed your property? Preston stared at her. I have no idea. I just paid what they told me to pay. That needs to be corrected. I can draft a letter to the territorial assessor's office disputing the valuation and requesting a proper survey. She continued sorting through papers, making notes on a separate sheet. Your supply costs from the general store are also inconsistent. You're paying different prices for the same goods depending on which clerk processes the sale. That suggests either poor inventory management on their part or deliberate overcharging. Mrs. Whitmore's store. Ah, Eleanor met his eyes, and they shared a moment of understanding. Well, regardless of personal dynamics, you should be paying fair prices. I recommend keeping detailed records of each purchase so you can identify discrepancies. They worked through the stack of papers for over an hour, Eleanor explaining what each document meant and what actions Preston needed to take. He listened intently, asking intelligent questions, his frustration with the bureaucracy evident but his commitment to understanding equally clear. Finally, Eleanor sat back. I can organize all of this into a proper system and help you file the necessary corrections and claims. It will take approximately 20 hours of work over the next 2 weeks. My rate is $1 per hour for work done outside my newspaper duties. That's more than fair, though I suspect you could charge twice that, and it would still be worth it to stop feeling like I'm drowning in paper. Preston hesitated, then added, I'll need to come into town to meet with you, or you could come out to the ranch to work. The ranch might be easier, actually. You'd have access to all the records in one place, and I could answer questions as they come up rather than waiting for the next meeting. Eleanor considered. It would certainly be more efficient, but it would also set tongues wagging. A divorced woman visiting a widower's ranch, spending hours alone with him. The gossip would be vicious. Then again, the gossip was already vicious, and she was tired of making decisions based on what other people would think. The ranch would be more efficient. I could come out on Thursday and Saturday afternoons when the newspaper is less busy. Mr. Jennings is flexible about my hours as long as the work gets done. Thursday and Saturday, then. I'll come fetch you in the wagon around 1 o'clock, bring you back before supper so Mrs. Walsh doesn't worry. Preston stood, gathering his hat. He met Eleanor's eyes with an expression she could not quite read. Thank you, Mrs. Rose, for the help with the papers, but also for what you said on Sunday, about being capable of protecting yourself and creating your own purpose. That takes a particular kind of strength. You intervened, Eleanor said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Catherine Whitmore and her circle of harpies have been making life miserable for anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable for too long. Someone needed to push back. He settled his hat on his head. I'll see you Thursday at 1. After he left, Eleanor sat for a long moment, staring at the organized stacks of papers on her desk. She had not expected this. Had not expected a man who recognized cruelty for what it was and chose to stand against it. Had not expected the quiet competence beneath the rough exterior, or the way he listened to her explanations as if her knowledge actually mattered. She had not expected to feel the small flutter of something that might, if she were foolish enough to nurture it, become interest. Thursday afternoon, Eleanor was waiting on the boarding house porch when Preston arrived with a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up to the seat with easy courtesy, and they headed east out of Lewiston along a rutted road that followed the river valley. Your children, Eleanor said after they had ridden in comfortable silence for a few minutes. They're at the ranch. Yes. Samuel is 12, Martha is 9, and Daniel is 7. They're good kids, though raising them alone hasn't been easy. My sister Mary and her husband live about 20 miles north, and she helped a lot in the early years. But they have 6 children of their own, and eventually I had to figure out how to manage on my own. 12 years old, Eleanor said carefully. That means your oldest was only 5 when your wife died. 5 years old and suddenly trying to be the man of the house. Samuel grew up too fast. They all did. Preston's hands were steady on the reins, but Eleanor heard the pain beneath his words. Rachel was a good woman, a good mother. She wanted a large family. After Daniel was born, I told her we had enough, that I didn't want to risk another pregnancy, but she wanted a daughter. Martha was rough housing with her brothers even as a toddler, and Rachel dreamed of a little girl who would want tea parties and dolls. So we tried once more, and it killed her. The rawness in his voice made Eleanor's chest tight. I'm sorry. People keep telling me I should remarry. That the children need a mother. That it's not natural for a man to raise children alone. Catherine Whitmore, in particular, has made it her mission to parade every unmarried woman in the county past me like I'm shopping for livestock. Preston glanced at Eleanor, and something in his expression was almost apologetic. I don't mean to be rude about women seeking marriage. It's a practical necessity for most. But I can't help feeling like they're not seeing me or my children. They're just seeing a ranch and an established household and a ready-made family to slot themselves into. Eleanor understood more than he probably realized. They see a role to fill, not a person to know. Exactly. Preston seemed relieved to be understood. And the thing is, I'm managing. The house is clean enough. The children are fed and clothed and educated. We have a rhythm that works. Bringing in a stranger to take over Rachel's role feels like betrayal of her memory and of the life we've built in her absence. Yet you're taking a risk bringing me to your ranch. People will talk. People are already talking about both of us. Might as well give them something real to chew on. Preston's mouth quirked. Besides, this is business. You're helping me organize my affairs. Nothing scandalous about that. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, sprawling across a valley with the river running along its eastern boundary. The main house was a solid structure of hewn logs, larger than Eleanor had expected, with a covered porch and multiple windows suggesting at least 4 or 5 rooms. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and several smaller structures. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, their red and white hides bright against the summer grass. It was a working ranch, prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of place that represented years of hard labor and careful management. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, and meant it. It's home. My father chose this valley, built that house with his own hands. I added the east wing when the children kept coming. It's not fancy, but it's solid. 3 children burst from the house as the wagon approached, shouting excitement at their father's return. They pulled up short when they saw Eleanor, suddenly shy in the presence of a stranger. Preston jumped down and helped Eleanor descend, then turned to his children with obvious pride. Samuel, Martha, Daniel, this is Mrs. Rose. She's going to be helping me organize all those papers I'm always complaining about. I expect you to be polite and stay out of her way while she's working. The children murmured greetings. Samuel, the oldest, had his father's dark hair and serious eyes. He studied Eleanor with an assessment that seemed too old for 12. Martha was all energy, barely contained, bouncing on her toes even while trying to stand still. And Daniel, the youngest, half hid behind his brother, peeking at Eleanor with curiosity. It's good to meet you all, Eleanor said. Your father has told me good things. Are you going to be our new mother? Martha asked with the bluntness of 9-year-old curiosity. Mrs. Whitmore said Papa needs to find us a new mother, but he keeps saying no. Are you the one he's been waiting for? Martha and Tucker. Preston's face flushed. That's inappropriate and you know it. Apologize to Mrs. Rose right now. It's all right, Eleanor said quickly, though her own face felt warm. Martha, I'm here to help your father with business matters, just paperwork and accounting, nothing more. Martha looked disappointed but nodded. Samuel rolled his eyes at his sister's question, the universal expression of older siblings everywhere. Daniel continued to hide, though Eleanor caught him sneaking glances at her when he thought she was not looking. Preston ushered Eleanor into the house, his embarrassment still evident. "I'm sorry about that. The children have been subjected to Catherine Whitmore's theories about what we need, and apparently they've internalized her nonsense." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor with its warmth and organization. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a large table dominating one end and comfortable chairs arranged near a stone fireplace at the other. Curtains hung at the windows, faded but clean. Dishes were stacked neatly on open shelves. The floor was swept. This was not the home of a man drowning in domestic chaos. This was a home that functioned, maintained through daily effort and care. "My office is this way," Preston said, leading Eleanor to a smaller room off the main space. "Though calling it an office is generous. It's mostly where I shove things I don't want to deal with." The room contained a desk buried under papers, several crates overflowing with more documents, and shelves lined with account books that looked like they had not been opened in years. It was indeed a mess, but Eleanor felt excitement rather than dismay. This was a puzzle she could solve, chaos she could transform into order. "This is perfect," she said, already mentally organizing the space. "I'll need to spread things out, sort them by type and date. Do you have another table I could use? I'll bring one in from the barn, and anything else you need. Just ask." They worked for the next 3 hours, Eleanor sorting through years of accumulated documents while Preston answered her questions about dates and transactions. The children peeked in occasionally, curious about this woman who seemed to know what all the confusing papers meant. At one point, Martha brought them both water, staying to watch Eleanor work with fascination. "You're really good at this," Martha said. "All those numbers make sense to you." "They do. It's like solving a puzzle. Every piece of information fits together to create a complete picture of how the ranch operates financially. I like puzzles. Papa says I'm good at figuring things out too. Then perhaps someday you'll work with numbers and accounts." Martha's eyes widened. "Can girls do that? I thought only men did business things." "Anyone with a brain can do business things. The trick is convincing people to give you the chance." Preston, who had been listening from across the room, smiled slightly. "Mrs. Rose is probably the smartest person in Lewiston when it comes to accounting. Man or woman?" The praise caught Eleanor off guard, warming her more than it should. She focused back on the papers in her hands, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. By 4:30, Eleanor had created a basic organizational system and identified the most urgent issues that needed addressing. Preston drove her back to town, promising to gather additional documents she had requested for their next meeting on Saturday. "Thank you," he said as they pulled up in front of the boarding house. "Not just for the help, though that's considerable, but for talking to Martha the way you did. She's a smart girl, but nobody has ever told her that being smart matters as much for girls as boys. It does matter. Just because the world does not always reward it doesn't make it less true." Preston held her gaze for a long moment. "You're not at all what I expected, Eleanor Rose." The use of her first name sent a small shock through her. It was too familiar, too personal, and yet she did not correct him. Saturday's work session followed a similar pattern, though Eleanor felt more comfortable in the ranch house this time. The children were less shy, particularly Martha, who attached herself to Eleanor whenever possible, asking questions about everything from arithmetic to what boys was like to whether Eleanor thought girls should be allowed to ride horses astride instead of side saddle. "I think girls should ride however is most practical and safe for the situation," Eleanor said. "Side saddle has its place for social riding, but if you're working on a ranch, you need security and mobility." "That's what I tell Papa, but Mrs. Whitmore says ladies don't sit astride because it's not modest." Mrs. Whitmore is not the arbiter of all behavior, despite her apparent belief otherwise. Martha giggled at that, and Eleanor caught Preston trying to hide a grin from across the room. Samuel joined them for a few minutes during a break, standing awkwardly near the desk. "Papa seems happier since you started coming around," he said abruptly. "He smiles more. I thought you should know that." Before Eleanor could respond, the boy fled, leaving her staring after him with a complexity of emotions she was not ready to examine. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Eleanor came to the ranch twice a week, working through Preston's accumulated paperwork while gradually getting to know his children. Samuel remained reserved but began sharing details about ranch operations, clearly preparing to take over the business someday. Martha became Eleanor's shadow, soaking up attention and conversation like someone starved for female companionship. And Daniel slowly emerged from his shyness, particularly after Eleanor helped him with arithmetic homework one afternoon, and praised his careful attention to detail. Preston himself remained polite but professional during their work sessions. Yet Eleanor caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful in ways that made her pulse quicken. And she noticed things about him too. The gentleness in his hands when he handled injured animals. The patience he showed teaching Daniel to rope fence posts. The way his face lit up when one of his children shared an accomplishment. He was a good father, a good man, worn down by years of hard work and loss but not broken by them. It was Martha who finally pushed them out of careful professionalism into something more complicated. 6 weeks after Eleanor began working at the ranch, Martha fell from a horse while trying to jump a fence, landing hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She was not seriously injured, but the incident left her shaken and crying for her mother, the mother she barely remembered but still missed with the deep ache of childhood loss. Eleanor found her in the barn afterward, curled in the hay, sobbing. Without thinking, Eleanor sat beside her and pulled the girl into her arms, letting her cry against her shoulder. "I miss her," Martha gasped. "I know I'm not supposed to remember her much because I was so little, but I miss her anyway. And I'm trying to be brave like Papa needs me to be, but sometimes I just want a mother like other girls have." "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to be brave all the time, and missing your mother is normal and right. She loved you very much. Did you ever want children? Do you have any?" The question stabbed through Eleanor's carefully maintained defenses. "No, I don't have children. My former husband and I tried, but it never happened. He blamed me for it, said I was broken." Martha pulled back, her tear-stained face indignant. "That's mean. You're not broken. You're smart and kind and you make Papa happy. His first wife probably wasn't as good as you. Martha, that's not how it works. Your mother was a wonderful woman. Your father loved her very much. I'm just helping with paperwork. But you could be more. I see how Papa looks at you when you're not watching, and how you look at him. Why don't grown-ups just say what they mean?" Eleanor had no answer for that. She held Martha until the girl's tears subsided, then walked her back to the house where Preston was pacing with worry. His relief at seeing Martha safe and relatively unhurt was palpable. But his eyes found Eleanor's over his daughter's head, and something in that gaze asked a question Eleanor was not ready to answer. That night at the boarding house, Harriet Walsh knocked on Eleanor's door with tea, and an expression that suggested she had been waiting for the right moment to speak. "You've been spending a lot of time at the Tucker Ranch," Harriet said without preamble, settling into the room's single chair while Eleanor sat on the bed. "I'm helping Mr. Tucker organize his business affairs. It's professional work." "I'm sure it is. But Eleanor, dear, you should know that Catherine Whitmore has been spreading talk. She's telling anyone who will listen that you're scheming to trap Preston Tucker into marriage, that you're using his children to manipulate him, that a barren, divorced woman has no business in a household with children. Eleanor's hands tightened on her teacup. I'm aware of Mrs. Whitmore's low opinion of me. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you should know what you're up against. Catherine had her sights set on marrying her widowed sister to Preston. When he showed no interest, she took it as a personal insult. Your presence, and particularly Preston's obvious regard for you, has made her vicious. His obvious regard. Eleanor's heart beat faster. I don't know what you mean. Harriet's expression turned knowing. Eleanor, I've run this boarding house for 20 years. I've seen more courtships, failed and successful, than you can imagine. That man looks at you like you're the answer to a question he's been too afraid to ask, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you look at him the same way. It doesn't matter how we look at each other. I can't give him more children. That's what he needs, what any man with a ranch needs. Sons to help with the work, to inherit the land. I'm 32 years old and apparently incapable of bearing children. Even if he wanted me, which is pure speculation on your part, I would be a poor choice. Did Preston say he needs more children? He doesn't have to say it. It's expected. It's what men want from wives. Harriet set down her teacup with a decisive clink. Eleanor Rose, you're one of the smartest women I've ever met when it comes to numbers and business. But you're being remarkably foolish about this. Preston Tucker spent 5 years listening to women tell him what he needs and what he should want. Maybe it's time someone asked him what he actually wants. The words stayed with Eleanor through a sleepless night. She had been so certain of what men wanted, what they needed from women. Thomas had made it brutally clear that her worth was measured in her fertility, but Preston was not Thomas. Preston had 3 children already. Preston had specifically told her he had tried to convince Rachel not to risk another pregnancy. Preston had rejected every woman who saw him as a problem to solve rather than a person to know. What did Preston Tucker actually want? The question terrified her because she suspected she knew the answer, and she had spent 7 years protecting herself from hope. Their next scheduled meeting fell on a Thursday that dawned with threatening clouds and a shift in the wind that promised storms. Eleanor almost sent word that she would not come, but she had promised to finish drafting Preston's letter to the territorial assessor, and she disliked breaking commitments. Preston arrived to collect her at 1 o'clock, his expression tense. "Storm's coming in fast," he said as he helped her into the wagon. "We'll work quickly and I'll get you back before it hits." They did not make it. The sky opened halfway to the ranch, dumping rain in sheets that turned the road into a river of mud. Preston urged the horses faster, but by the time they reached the ranch house, both he and Eleanor were soaked through. He rushed her inside while the children exclaimed over the sudden storm. "I'll get you a dry dress," Preston said, water dripping from his hair. "Rachel's things are still packed away. You're about the same size." "That's not necessary. I'll dry by the fire." "You'll catch your death. Please, Eleanor, let me help you." The use of her first name again, the concern in his voice, the way he looked at her like she mattered beyond her ability to organize his paperwork. It was too much and not enough all at once. Preston disappeared into what must be his bedroom and returned with a simple cotton dress in faded blue, along with a towel. He showed Eleanor to a small room where she could change in privacy. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was slightly loose in the bodice, a reminder that Rachel had borne 4 children to Eleanor's none. She toweled her hair as dry as possible and emerged to find Preston had also changed into dry clothes. He had sent the children to their rooms to play, giving them privacy. "The storm's not letting up," he said, looking out the window at the deluge. "You'll have to stay until it passes. I can't risk the wagon in this." I understand. Thank you for the dry clothes." They stood in the main room, suddenly awkward with each other in a way they had not been before. The intimacy of wearing his dead wife's dress, of being alone in his house while storm raged outside, shifted something between them. The careful professionalism they had maintained felt thin as paper. "Eleanor," Preston said finally, "we need to talk about what's happening here." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. I see how you are with my children. I see how Martha lights up when you arrive, how Samuel actually shares his thoughts when you're around, how Daniel comes out of his shell. And I see how you look at me when you think I'm not watching, the same way I look at you." Eleanor's throat went tight. "Preston, I can't be what you need. I can't give you more children. I'm damaged in that way, broken like my husband said. You have a working ranch that will need sons to inherit it, and I cannot provide that." Preston crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just in front of her, close enough that she could see the rain drops still caught in his dark hair. "Did I ever say I wanted more children? Everyone wants children. It's what marriage is for. Not for me. Not anymore." His voice was fierce now, almost angry. "Do you know what the worst part was of Rachel dying? It wasn't losing her, though, that nearly destroyed me. It was knowing that I had let her risk her life for something I didn't even want. I told her after Daniel that we had enough. I told her I didn't need more children. But she wanted another chance at a daughter, and I loved her, so I agreed. And it killed her. The guilt of that has eaten at me for 7 years." Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding. "But the ranch, Samuel will inherit the ranch if he wants it, and if he doesn't, I'll sell it. Or Martha will take it. She's got more ranching sense than her brothers combined. The point is, I don't need more children. I have 3 beautiful children who keep me busy enough. What I don't have, what I haven't had for 7 long years, is someone to share the life with. Someone to talk to after the children are asleep. Someone who sees me as more than a provider or a problem to solve. Someone who challenges me and makes me think and makes me feel alive instead of just going through motions. Preston, when Catherine Whitmore and her circle attacked you after church that first Sunday, I saw something in your eyes. Not weakness, strength. The strength to stand alone, to create your own path, to refuse to be diminished by people who judge you by standards that have nothing to do with your worth. And when you came to my ranch and met my children and didn't try to replace their mother or slot yourself into some predetermined role, when you just talked to them like they were people worth knowing, I started hoping for something I thought I'd given up on." "What?" Eleanor whispered, barely able to breathe. "A partner. An equal. Someone who chooses to be here not because she needs rescue or because she sees opportunity, but because she wants to build something real with me, with us." Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes. "I'm divorced, childless. Judged by every woman in town. How can you want someone like me?" Preston reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I want someone exactly like you. I don't need you to give me children. I don't need you to be anything other than who you are. Eleanor Rose, I am falling in love with you, not with some idea of what a wife should be. With you, specifically. Your sharp mind and your fierce independence and the way you make my daughter believe she can do anything. I know it's only been a few months. I know we're both carrying damage. But I need you to know what I want, so you can stop deciding for me what I need." "I'm falling in love with you too," Eleanor said, the admission torn from somewhere deep and protected. "But I'm terrified. Thomas made me feel worthless. Like my only purpose was breeding, and when I failed at that, I had no value. I don't know how to believe I could be enough for you without giving you more children. Then let me say it clearly, so there's no confusion. I don't need more children, I need you. Just you, right here, exactly as you are. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. He kissed her then, and Eleanor kissed him back, pouring 7 years of loneliness and longing into the pressure of her lips against his. Outside, thunder rolled and rain battered the roof. Inside, something that had been frozen in both of them began to thaw. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor rested her forehead against Preston's chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "The whole town will talk. Catherine Whitmore will be vicious. Let them talk. I've spent 7 years living according to other people's expectations of what I should want and need. I'm done with that. If you'll have me, if you'll have us, then nothing else matters. Your children adore you already. Martha's been dropping hints about you becoming part of the family since the second week you started coming here. Samuel told me last week that you were the first person besides Rachel who ever made him feel like his thoughts mattered. And Daniel asked me yesterday if you liked horses because he wants to show you his favorite mare. They're not looking for a replacement mother. They're hoping for someone who will love them and let them love her back, just like I am." Eleanor pulled back enough to look up at him. "I've never been someone's choice before. I was Thomas's disappointment. I've been town's scandal. I don't know how to be someone's first choice." Preston's thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek. "Then we'll figure it out together, because you're my first choice, Eleanor. The only choice I want to make." The storm raged for another 2 hours, trapping them in the ranch house together while they talked through 7 years of accumulated pain and hope. Preston told her about Rachel, about the love they had shared and the guilt he carried. Eleanor told him about Thomas, about the gradual erosion of her self-worth under constant judgment about her childlessness. They shared scars and slowly began to believe they might heal them together. When the rain finally stopped and Preston drove Eleanor back to town, they rode in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of people who had said the important things and were content to simply be together. At the boarding house door, Preston took her hand. "I'm going to court you properly," he said, "because you deserve that. I'm going to take you to dinner and drive you out to see the sunset over the valley and ask you every day if you're sure this is what you want. And when you're certain, when you have no doubts left, I'm going to ask you to marry me. Is that acceptable?" Eleanor smiled, real and unguarded in a way she had not smiled in years. "That's acceptable. More than acceptable. Good. I'll see you Saturday for our regular work session. And Sunday after church, if you're willing to sit with me and publicly declare yourself spoken for." "I'm willing." News of their courtship spread through Lewiston like wildfire, and the reactions split along predictable lines. Some people, particularly those who had always liked Preston and resented Catherine Whitmore's social tyranny, expressed happiness for them. Others whispered and speculated and judged. Catherine herself was viciously angry, making no secret of her opinion that Eleanor had trapped Preston, that she was using his children to secure a comfortable position, that a barren woman had no business in a house full of children. The Sunday after the storm, Eleanor sat with Preston and his children in church, and she felt every eye in the building tracking them. But Preston's hand found hers during the sermon, solid and sure, and Martha leaned against her shoulder like she belonged there, and Samuel gave her a small smile that felt like acceptance. Whatever poison Catherine wanted to spread could not touch the reality of what they were building together. The courting period lasted 3 months, not because either of them doubted, but because Preston had been right that Eleanor deserved to be chosen properly. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, letting the whole town see them together. He brought her flowers from his sister Mary's garden. He drove her out to see the ranch at different times of day, showing her the life they would build together. And slowly, Eleanor's certainty grew that this was real, that Preston Tucker had chosen her not despite her childlessness, but because of who she was as a complete person. The The children were part of the courtship too. Martha began calling Eleanor by her first name and then, tentatively, began asking if it would be all right to call her something else eventually, something that acknowledged the role Eleanor was growing into without replacing Rachel. Samuel started including Eleanor in conversations about the ranch's future, seeking her opinion on business decisions and seeming to genuinely value her input. And Daniel, shy Daniel, brought Eleanor wildflowers one afternoon and told her he was glad his papa was happy again. In November, as the first snow began to fall, Preston took Eleanor to the hilltop overlooking his ranch and asked her to marry him with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Eleanor said yes without hesitation, and they rode back to the house to tell the children, who celebrated with the uninhibited joy of young people who understood they were gaining something precious rather than losing anything at all. Catherine Whitmore made one final attempt to poison the well, cornering Eleanor outside the general store 2 weeks before the wedding. "You may have fooled Preston Tucker," Catherine hissed, "but everyone knows what you are, a barren woman taking advantage of a lonely man. Those children need a real mother, someone who can give them siblings and expand the family properly. You're just a useless shell taking up space that should go to someone who can actually fulfill a woman's purpose." Eleanor looked at her steadily, no longer wounded by the familiar attack. "Mrs. Whitmore, I used to think as you do that my worth was measured solely by my ability to bear children. It took me years to understand that was a lie. I have value beyond my womb. I have skills and intelligence and the capacity to love and be loved. Preston doesn't need me to give him more children. He needs a partner who respects him and loves his existing children and can help him build the life he wants rather than the life you think he should want. And I intend to be that partner for the rest of our lives. What you think about it matters not at all." She walked away, leaving Catherine sputtering behind her, and felt freer than she had in 7 years. They married in the same church where they had first seen each other, on a cold December morning in 1878 with snow falling gently outside the windows. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress and Preston wore his best suit, and Samuel and Martha and Daniel stood with them as witnesses to the promises they made. Harriet Walsh cried. Mr. Jennings, who had grown fond of his efficient bookkeeper, smiled broadly. And even some of Catherine Whitmore's former friends attended, having finally tired of her venom and recognized genuine love when they saw it. The ranch became Eleanor's home in truth, and she transformed the chaos of Preston's business affairs into organized efficiency while also slowly adding her touches to the house itself. New curtains, repaired furniture, a small herb garden. Not erasing Rachel's memory, but building something new alongside it. The children thrived under the attention of 2 parents instead of one overwhelmed father. Martha blossomed with Eleanor's encouragement, growing into a confident girl who believed she could do anything she set her mind to. Samuel relaxed, no longer trying to carry adult responsibilities at 13, and began to simply be a boy again. And Daniel came entirely out of his shell, chattering endlessly to Eleanor about everything from horses to clouds to the interesting bugs he found under rocks. Eleanor discovered that motherhood came in many forms, and that loving Preston's children was as natural as breathing despite having not given birth to them herself. She also discovered that marriage could be a partnership of equals, that Preston genuinely valued her opinions and saw her as essential not for what she could produce, but for who she was. In March of 1879, Preston's sister Mary came to visit with her husband and 6 children. Over dinner, as the table groaned with food and noise and laughter, Mary pulled Eleanor aside. "I was worried when Preston wrote about courting you," Mary admitted. Not because of the gossip, but because I didn't want him to marry out of loneliness or because people kept telling him he should. But seeing you together, seeing how the children are with you, I understand now. You're exactly what they needed, what he needed, not a replacement or a solution to a problem, a true partner. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I never thought I would have this. A family, a home, someone who chose me for myself. I thought I was too damaged. You were never damaged, just waiting for the right place to bloom. Mary squeezed her hand. Welcome to the family, Eleanor Tucker. The next years unfolded with the rhythm of ranch life, marked by changing seasons and the steady growth of children toward adulthood. Samuel eventually decided he wanted to attend university in the East, studying law rather than ranching, and both Eleanor and Preston supported his choice even though it meant the ranch would not stay in his hands. Martha, as expected, fell in love with ranch work and announced at 16 that she intended to run the place herself someday, unmarried if necessary. And Eleanor helped her navigate the legal complexities of a woman owning property. Daniel found his passion in breeding horses, developing an eye for quality bloodlines that served the ranch well. In 1883, a visiting doctor stopped at the ranch after his horse threw a shoe, and over dinner, Eleanor mentioned her history of childlessness to him in passing. He asked several careful questions, then explained gently that based on what she described, the problem had likely been with Thomas, not with her. Some men were infertile, he explained, though few would admit it and most found it easier to blame their wives. Eleanor sat with that information for a long time, feeling anger and grief for the years she had believed herself broken. But then Preston found her in the garden, and she told him what the doctor had said, and he held her while she cried for the woman she had been who had believed the lies. "Does it change anything?" Preston asked quietly. "Knowing you probably could have had children with someone else." Eleanor thought about it honestly. "No, I have children, 3 of them growing up healthy and strong and loved. I have a partner who values me for myself. I have a life I built by choice rather than by obligation. I wouldn't trade any of it, even for the biological children I thought I wanted. This family is mine in every way that matters." "Ours," Preston corrected, kissing the top of her head. "This family is ours." In 1885, Samuel graduated from university and returned to Lewiston as the town's first dedicated attorney, taking over the legal affairs of half the county. He married a smart woman from Boston who shocked the town by wearing trousers on her wedding day, and Eleanor adored her immediately. Martha began acquiring her own land, building a reputation as the best horse breeder in the territory. And Daniel, always the gentlest of the 3, married his childhood sweetheart and brought her to live at the ranch, expanding the house Preston's father had built to accommodate the growing family. In 1887, Martha came to Eleanor with a problem. She had fallen in love with a woman, the school teacher who had moved to Lewiston the previous year. She was terrified of being judged, of losing her family, of the town's reaction. Eleanor held her daughter, not by blood but by choice and love, and said fiercely, "You love who you love. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to your father and me. You are our daughter, and we will stand with you no matter what." Preston, when told, simply hugged Martha and asked when he could meet this woman who had captured his fierce daughter's heart. They worked out arrangements that protected both women's reputations while allowing them to build a life together, and if some people in town whispered, many more simply accepted that the Tucker family did things their own way and always had. In 1890, Daniel's wife gave birth to Preston and Eleanor's first grandchild, a boy they named James. Eleanor held the baby with wonder, understanding that she had become a grandmother without ever being a biological mother, and feeling grateful for the circuitous path that had led her here. Catherine Whitmore had moved away years earlier. Her influence in Lewiston diminished after multiple scandals involving her husband's business dealings. New families had come, and the old judgments had faded. Eleanor was simply Mrs. Tucker now, respected for her sharp business sense and her role in helping half the ranchers in the county organize their affairs. The boarding house where she had first stayed had closed when Harriet Walsh retired, and Eleanor had hosted a party celebrating the woman who had been kind when kindness mattered. One evening in late summer of 1895, 17 years after Eleanor had stepped off a stagecoach into a town that had seemed likely to judge her as harshly as every other, she sat on the porch of the ranch house with Preston, watching the sun set over the valley. They were both in their 50s now, grayed and weathered but still strong. The sounds of family drifted from inside the house. Martha and her partner discussing breeding stock, Daniel and his wife settling their 3 children for bed, Samuel's voice as he read from a law book in preparation for a trial. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked quietly. "Marrying a widower with 3 children instead of finding someone who could give you the life people said you should want." Eleanor took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this partnership with you, it's worth more than any fantasy of what I thought I was supposed to have. I'm glad I was childless when we met, because it meant I was free to find you. And I'm grateful every day that you saw me as enough, just as I was." "You were always more than enough," Preston said. "You were everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, 2 people who had found each other despite damage and judgment and the world's narrow definitions of what they should be. Inside the house, their family, built not by blood alone but by choice and love and fierce commitment, continued the life they had built together. Years later, after both Preston and Eleanor had passed into memory, Martha would tell her own partner's children about her parents. About the woman who had been judged for being childless and the widower who had said he didn't need more kids, just her right here. About how they had built a family on respect and choice and love that transcended biology. About how the greatest legacy was not children or land or wealth, but the example of living authentically and choosing love over the expectations of others. And the Tucker Ranch, passed down through Martha's line, would remain in the family for generations, a testament to the partnership that had built it into something more than just land and cattle. It became a symbol of what was possible when people chose each other for who they really were, rather than for what society said they should need. The story of Preston and Eleanor Tucker became part of Lewiston's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But for those who had known them, it was simply the truth of 2 damaged people who had found healing in each other, who had built a family not according to anyone's rules but their own, and who had proved that love came in many forms, all of them valid and valuable, and worth celebrating. In the end, Eleanor's legacy was not the children she had not borne but the lives she had touched, the example she had set, and the fierce proof that a woman's worth extended far beyond her fertility. And Preston's legacy was the choice he had made to see beyond convention, to recognize the woman rather than the role, and to build a life based on partnership rather than possession. They had been enough for each other, exactly as they were. And in being enough, they had created something extraordinary.